I mean, you openly admitted on my stream that you brought the stealthing discourse back up a year later because you were trying to be hyperbolic and stir things up with Destiny. That was drama baiting, right?
Is that what I said? Sure.
Yeah.
My clothing statement is that a lot of the gravitas towards Andrew Tate has been because he speaks very obvious truths about like capitalism and harkens to a lot of very like misogynistic and sexist rhetoric, which is yet to be deconstructed in society. And then people who are not very emotionally mature think that saying, why can't you just acknowledge this obvious truth, somehow makes them enlightened, when in fact it just shows that they have the mindset of a child, of being impressed by very simple, obvious, banal realities, and thinking beyond that is too hard for them because they want to praise the obvious. That is my closing statement.
Well, I mean, they fall towards him more than anything because of a
No, Tom,
crisis
you're the one
in
doing that. Like
masculinity.
you have that issue.
So masculinity is why they all gravitate towards him, because he actually appreciates masculinity and upholds it, and that's why people like him. And so it's a good topic to talk about is masculinity.
You're the one who said that masculinity is inherently misogynistic, not me. It's fine.
Wait, what?
So, I have a little thing that I made, and we need to go over it now.
Okay.
Okay. It was following the horrible thing that we did the other day, and I took little notes. So I need to go over this paint drawing with you that is full of typos, and I need you to tell me if you disagree with things.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to tell me about your emotional state? Because I heard you were upset, and I was upset too.
Yes, so. I've been triggered for days. Yes, I am. This has helped me reset the stream. At the beginning of stream, I was still very triggered, but I am currently freshly reset, so we're good.
Okay, what exactly are you triggered about?
Literally every time I would try to repeat your arguments back to you, you would say no, but then seemingly say the same thing afterwards. And then every time you would try to repeat my arguments back to me, I would say no and say the exact opposite, yet you would still argue against the thing you thought I was saying anyways.
Okay. So here's what I think a lot of it is going to come down to while I look for the thing. Do you remember it was basically our first conversation? It was about you and I talking about Destiny and I's conversation. And you were saying that a lot of the times you just want to say descriptives. And you taught me the difference between descriptive and prescriptive. You talked about how a lot of people think that the descriptives that you say are like they treat it like as a prescriptive, and then they jump at your throat when you just want to properly analyze reality. You remember that, right?
Yes.
And the same thing again happened in this specific conversation where Sick, Dave, and you think you're speaking some obvious descriptive truths and people are denying them. And I think all of that at the end of the day, can I be mean?
I guess. I would try to avoid characterizations and just kind of like engage instead, because that was part of what was triggering me over and over the other days. Like everybody wanted to keep giving characterizations of each other's arguments, and it was driving me insane.
Okay. So, I found it. Great. So my issue with doing that is that for me, okay, I'm going to do a me statement. When people do descriptives and they want to be praised for them, or like they think they're saying something like that furthers the conversation. And for me, it's a very obvious, meaningless statement. Um, I have like a lot of, I don't know, frustration or almost like cognitive dissonance. Like I don't understand. When you and I talked about Jordan Peterson, you said like when you say a descriptive, you are going to need to establish why you're saying it. Otherwise, it just becomes a dog whistle. You remember when we talked about that?
You said if you're saying a meaningless statement, you have to address it. Otherwise, it becomes a dog whistle.
You like have to give the context of why you making that descriptive
Yes.
when it's like
Yes.
a potentially
Yes.
harmful descriptive, when it's a
Yes.
descriptive that like falls into stereotypes or
Yeah,
stuff
so like
that.
I gave for the audience, I gave the example of like if I say Jews are disproportionately in power, I should have a reason for why I'm saying it. Because if I'm just saying it, it sounds like a dog whistle. But if I'm saying it
Yes.
because I like for a reason that actually has some sort of utility, then it's not a dog whistle. Like we can acknowledge the truth, but if we're just acknowledging the truth for just cause, then it's going to sound like a dog whistle.
Yes, yes. Okay. So a lot of what happened in that conversation for me is that first of all, I felt like a lot of your descriptives were just straight up false and were more like built from your own like biases and rather than like realities. And the second thing was that there was never like a prescriptive or anything, so it just felt like I'm saying this without saying I'm saying the quiet without saying the quiet part out loud. Like it felt like continuous like promoting of a certain like worldview without
Yeah.
actually saying anything. And that's
Yeah.
what was frustrating.
This is what I started off the stream saying, is that like I listened back to the entire thing twice. And for me, it was that you were the entire time engaging in prescriptions and I was the entire time engaging in descriptions. But I stopped the conversation numerous times and said, hold on, like right now we're being descriptive. Like I'm just stating descriptive realities. We can get to the prescriptive, but first we have to like agree on this stuff. Otherwise our prescriptions are meaningless if we're talking about different things.
Yes, but sorry. Yeah.
Well, and so it seems like the descriptive is being denied in like I'm blanking on the word, but like in hopes of a prescription, like the like if these descriptive realities are acknowledged, then your prescription is hurt. And so you can't acknowledge these descriptive realities because you feel like it'll invalidate your prescription. And that's how I felt.
Okay, yeah, I hear you. So here's the thing. First of all, I felt like a lot of the descriptives were just straight up wrong, which we'll talk about. I do understand what you're saying. Here's the thing. From my mode of analysis, the way that I engage, and I think I think you've watched this video of mine, and I don't even know. Like, it's very frustrating to me in the online space when people go, well, this is how people are, as a descriptive. And they're like, okay, this is how people are. Let's work from there. How do we cope with how people are? And my entire worldview is like, if people are a certain way, and I think that's bad, I'd want to challenge how people are. So and challenging it means making like societal and socialization change, which means telling people, hey, you don't have to be this way. This isn't an inherent truth of reality. This isn't gravity. You're a human, you're malleable. You don't have to be this way if you don't want to. And when I say stuff like that, people are like, well, you're not acknowledging reality. I'm like, no, I'm just choosing to live differently. I don't have to act according to how most people conform to socialization, right? So that's like where I'm coming from.
So if I want like there to be changes for the Black community, and I want them to not feel like they have to live a certain life, or they have to join a gang, or they have to commit crimes, if I start to deny that Black people commit crimes at a higher rate, I'm not actually doing that. Like, I'm not actually helping them in any way, because the problem isn't even being addressed now. It's just being ignored and pretended like it doesn't exist. And that
I agree with
seems
that.
like when we're talking about gender, like, if we wanted to make changes to what gender is and help, which I have prescriptions to it, I have things that I would like to do that would, I believe, be helpful to society, and that would be progressive. But it's the descriptive parts that people disagree on, to where when they don't even engage with what the problem is, then it seems like their prescription has no value because it doesn't actually apply to the real world.
Okay, so here's the thing. When you say like what the problem is, so taking the black people example, the problem is not that black people perform crime in higher rates, because that is not what's causing the problem. That's why I keep saying, why is it like that? Because there are systemic reasons that lead to that. And
Yes.
those are the stuff that I'd want to tackle. So when people say, why can't you acknowledge the reality that black people have higher crime rates? I'm like, I can acknowledge that reality, but that reality on itself is meaningless, because without knowing why and tackling why, you are just like reinforcing paranoia of black people.
Yes,
When
I
that
agree
is
with
like, it's
this.
not something essential about black people,
I
right?
agree with this,
So
but if you deny that they have a higher crime rate, you cannot even ask the why, right?
yes, but I don't feel like I do that. We can discuss if you feel like I did that with the gender thing. Okay.
Okay.
So do you mind looking? I'm sharing my
I've
little
got it
page
up.
thing. Please ignore my typos. Can we just go over it and you tell me if you disagree with anything that I wrote?
Okay. So it says you're born. Doctor looks at genitalia. If exterior genitalia seems to fit normative male/female characteristics, then the corresponding gender is assigned. Baby is now addressed as boy/girl. Baby is baby shaped, so no masculine/feminine presenting traits except for the literal genitalia. Boy or girl boy/girl is treated socially with the corresponding cultural socialization of said gender, such as going to the girls' aisle for clothes or going to soccer practice for boys. And then boy or girl has a schematic understanding of what is boy/man versus girl/woman in their environment. Yes, I agree with this.
Okay. So here are things that I found quite frustrating in the conversation. So the biggest point of contention, there were two big points for me in your descriptive. The descriptive about feminine versus masculine, meaning like the gender. So like the more masculine you are, like once you cross a certain threshold into masculinity, you are now a man. I completely reject all of that, which is what this paint thing is about. So we can talk about that first. So I felt a lot of the things that you were saying to like demonstrate that, like even the example that I told you, like give me something that has to do with like social gender that isn't about sex, and you talked about like carrying purses.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt really stupid after the conversation because I didn't call it out during the conversation. But a purse, by definition, is a bag that is intended for women. So the truth is, when you say purse, you mean a small bag. And carrying a small bag is not a feminine trait. It becomes a feminine trait when we label it as a purse. That's like my biggest contention with your entire thing, is that, and I've said that repeatedly during the conversation, is that feminine and masculine are imperfect categories, as in they're cataloged with a lot of fallacies into them, and then we take it as like truth, and even our language is constructed to enforce those things. They are arbitrary, as they are too arbitrary for me to take as like real things that represent something real. That's
Yeah.
my thing.
Okay, so
Okay.
men where I live do not carry anything remotely close to a purse, except for in very few circumstances. There are some things that are called like satchels or something like that that are similar, but that's still very, very rare. By far, the majority of people who are going to carry a handheld bag or a bag that just straps over one arm, that is like 99% going to be females. There are other types of bags like book bags and crap like that, that are gender neutral, but things like what we call a purse are almost always carried just by women, and so we consider it a feminine thing only because women are by far the majority going to carry them. Not only that, but they're just by far the majority going to carry bags in general. Like they have feminine hygiene products that they carry more often, and they have makeup that they carry more often. They have all sorts of other things that they carry with them. When I leave my house, I just don't have things that I carry except for like my wallet and my phone. And so these are things that are a lot less common for men in my country and insanely common for women.
Okay. So, I'm exploring this with you right now. So let me know if I'm going off in a direction that isn't good. Do we agree that like a bag or a small bag is not considered socially to be a feminine thing to carry or a feminine trait?
A bag in general, like it depends on the bag. Like I don't think I could say in general. Like book bags not are not gender specific. Grocery bags are not gender specific, but purses are.
Yes, Tom, but what I'm trying to indicate is that when we call it a purse, we're already labeling it as feminine. It's kind of
Right.
like it's
But
feminine because women wear purses and purses are for women, and women wear purses because purses are for women. You know, it's like circular.
Well, no, because I already separated the type of purse that it is, like, or the type of bag that it is, and said that
Okay.
this is going to be different from what everybody else
Like
carries.
a small bag. Yeah.
Yes, not just a small bag, but like a handheld bag or a bag that straps over one arm. So like I named a bunch of different types of bags that men do
Okay.
carry, but none of them are similar to purses. They're just different. They're bags, but just because they're bags doesn't mean they're anything like a purse.
Okay. So, what I'm trying to indicate, I guess, that if I were to go to the majority of people and maybe you disagree with this. So I think that if we polled like a few thousand people and we asked them, if you carry a bag that has like one shoulder strap, is that feminine? I assume that most people would say no. Unlike if you asked if you carry a purse, is that feminine? Do you get what I'm saying?
I agree that the percentages
The
would
framing
probably be
matters.
higher, but I think that
Mhm.
they would still be pretty close. I think most people would think a bag like for one that straps over one shoulder is going to be a feminine thing.
Okay. So I guess that would be like something that we agree that we don't know the answer, and you and I just have different assumptions about how that go.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can
Okay.
name other things that could be gender neutral, things like tights, things like makeup, things like wigs. Like,
Yeah, I
there's.
was gonna ask you about makeup actually. So here's the thing. My whole thesis is basically that the thing that was really getting me stuck during our conversation is what I feel is a conflation between masculine and feminine and like gender. And then another thing which we don't have to touch right now. So the whole thing that I'm trying to do right now is just, you don't have to agree with me, but I want to make a strong enough case that there is an arbitrary factor to the point where I don't have to accept your descriptive as like true. That was
When
my
you hold on,
resistance.
when
That
you say
I'm
accept it as truth, do you mean like whether or not it actually exists or whether or not you want it to exist.
Okay, so you mean like whether or not people believe it's the truth, or whether or not it actually true?
Whether or not it's descriptively real versus like prescriptively real.
Mm.
Whether or not it is true versus whether or not you want it to be true. So like when I say gender is a pattern that we've recognized, lots of people on the left will say, well, no, I don't believe in gender. Now, the pattern exists, but when they say they don't believe in gender, they make it sound like they just don't recognize the pattern, even though everybody else recognizes it. They're saying when they say they don't believe it exists, they're just saying the pattern doesn't exist, which to everybody else, it does exist. Descriptively, it exists, but they're prescriptively saying that it doesn't exist.
So I think, and this is what I'm coming to a problem with right now as well, is that I think it might sound to people like people are saying, oh, the pattern doesn't exist. When actually what people are saying, that's like the pattern is made up. The pattern is not found in nature. We created the pattern.
Right.
That's the distinction.
Sure, but so this is what I was trying to say the other day. Is I don't think anybody really disagrees on that, though. Like, especially not me. I definitely don't disagree on that, but that doesn't change whether or not the pattern exists. And so when people say gender doesn't exist, which is why I kept trying to get into definitions, is because when you say gender doesn't exist, what you are saying is that the pattern doesn't exist, but that might not be what you mean to say.
Okay, so I'll come your direction, and hopefully you come to mine. What I want you to come towards me on is that there are absolutely there are absolutely people who think the pattern is found in nature of like gender. It's like conservatives like a lot, and all right,
but they're
people,
talking
like,
about sex though, right? When they say that, they're talking about sex. What people who actually make a sex gender distinction aren't really going to, because like objectively, just by making the distinction, they are acknowledging that there is the social construction.
Yes, but even you in your descriptive sometimes made, and even I can like recognize, like, what Jude was saying, that like gender is downstream from sex, because there are gendered behaviors that are like downstream from biology, right?
When you
So
say
like
downstream, do you mean like they're influenced by it, or that we connect the concept to it?
I'll just give you an example and you
he was
tell
saying
me.
we connect the concept to it.
Let me think about that.
Because that was part of the disagreement the entire night, is where you kept saying, I was saying gender was biological, and I kept saying, no, I'm not saying it's biological. I'm saying we connect the concept to biology, but it is not biological.
Yeah. And I got towards the later part of the night that, like, I felt like the examples that you were giving, like men being more aggressive, that's a biological statement. Especially, I wouldn't say it's biological. I'd say it's mostly socially constructed. But when you then bring up testosterone, that's like biology being inserted into that. But then we start talking about purses, and that's different, right? That's why I kept asking you, like, give me a non-biological, like, social, like, gender thing. So I did pick up on that eventually. But,
even when we bring in biology, we're just saying that this makes it more likely, but not that this is like inherent to the thing. Like, so even when we were talking about like women being more emotional, like that just means that okay, I can send you a million articles that say otherwise, but
are they from the debunked neuroscientist?
No, like even if you just Google it, like it'll tell you, but that's fine. So but like just the concept of like women being more emotional, like that isn't something that is objective, right? Like that just means that they're more likely going to be more emotional, but it doesn't mean that they like have to be more emotional. And so when we say it's biological, it makes it sound objective. We're just saying the biological makes this more likely.
Okay. So going back to connected versus influenced. Okay, so when people say downstream from biology, they mean something like that the stereotype of women being more nurturing has to do with them connecting that like females give birth and then they make like a cognitive connection that if she gives birth and she holds the baby, and I've seen many pictures of like women and babies and they're smiling, therefore women must be more nurturing than men. Um, so I'd argue that is not like that is associated. It's not connected.
Okay, so in the book, The Female Brain, it has studies that it shows that say that women actually have different frequencies that they can even hear, that that have different responses in their brain that are triggered by like babies crying or like mostly associated with baby noises, which seems to indicate that there are some things that make them more responsive uh, to like child rearing.
Responsive to child rearing is not the same as nurturing.
Um, so I feel like child rearing is nurturing. No?
Okay. Do you want to like argue about that right now, or should we?
I
Because
don't
like
know if it matters, but
I don't think it is. Do
yeah,
you
I
want
don't
me to
think
just
it
give a different example?
sure.
Uh,
Well, I mean, I guess it does
mm,
matter cuz like when I'm
mhm.
talking about things within gender that would be influenced by biology, that is something that I'm talking about. Is like so saying like women being more expressive with their emotions, this seems to be attached to something that is within their estrogen, within their brains, that actually makes them more likely to be good at child rearing or good at child nurturing, which is which seems to also play out in other areas of their life. Like it's not like being more emotional or being more responsive to certain sounds is only going to affect you when it comes to a baby, right? That's going to affect you when it comes
Yeah,
to an array of other things in your life. And so it's going to
yeah,
start to play out in a million other ways as well.
yeah. Okay. What's your point? I'm sorry, I lost you.
So if it plays out in a million other ways as well, we would start to recognize those patterns being more common with females, and then we would consider it feminine.
Okay. But we have to like so I'm gonna try to find I'm not saying that every time we recognize a pattern that is more common with what we associate women to be, um, it is like a false pattern. Which I think you understand that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What I am saying is that humans are really inclined to pattern recognitions, but humans are also very flawed and have a lot of heuristics and a lot of fallacies they use to construct those patterns.
They
And those
overly recognize
patterns,
patterns.
yes, those patterns don't actually um, are not necessarily like meaningful in like a useful way, right? So we agree on that. So because of that, I think that fuck. Okay, so we agree on that we over recognize pattern, or we can. Um,
Yeah, it's how we end up with conspiracy theorists and all sorts of crap.
yeah. So basically, I felt highly frustrated during the conversation because it felt what you were doing is you didn't want to talk about whether the patterns are like being a case of like over recognition of pattern or like misguided recognition of patterns. You just wanted us to conform, me to conform to saying, but humans recognize these patterns, so that is how we define this thing. And then me and both Kura were saying humans can be wrong in the way that they assess or categorize things, which matters. And it felt like for you, and you've basically explicitly said that, it doesn't matter. I'm just talking about what people think,
Correct.
you know?
Yes. So yeah, it
Yes.
doesn't matter. So if we're trying to nail down like what gender is, and I'm saying, well, it is masculinity and femininity, and you guys say, well, what is that? And I say, well, it is what we associate with males and females. It doesn't matter whether or not the pattern actually exists in order for me to give you that definition. What matters is that we do associate that with females. Therefore, we call it feminine. Whether or not it is like inherently feminine or objectively feminine, or whether or not the pattern is actually there, those don't actually matter for me to convey a definition to you.
Okay. So the entire thing erupted when I was talking to Ozzy and I was trying to get an answer out of him. And then I asked him, look, you're saying that there are things that are forever like stable as men and women things, like gender traits. And I
Yeah.
wanted to get an answer of him. And then I did a thing and I said, even though I don't think gender is a thing at all, so I disagree with you, but I want to hear from your perspective because you think gender is a real thing. And then
Mhm.
you interrupted me, and then like you were like, what do you mean it's not a real thing? And then like we went on that whole tirade, right? So I guess what I'm asking is like, what was frustrating is that like I can recognize that humans might have like a false way of looking at it. Like you and I both talk to neo-Nazis that obviously a lot of their ideology is based on like conspiracies and like false premises. So like obviously it's possible for a person to theoretically acknowledge and interact with something that they find like on the premise level like false, but still be like, okay, if I took your initial premise and then continue that conversation. So I guess like what I'm saying is I can engage in your world where we're just talking about people being wrong, but it seems like you're bothered that I am more concerned with like explaining to people how they're wrong.
So so that is the issue, is that
Okay.
when I'm telling you that I agree with you on that, that means I'm not wrong. That means that I'm right, that it's just an association, and that's the end of it. But you keep wanting to make the point that it's just an association. We already agree on that. I don't care that it's just an association. That doesn't change that that's what makes us call it femininity. But you want to focus on the fact that some of the associations may not actually be there, or may not be real patterns. And I'm saying it doesn't matter. That's still what makes us call it feminine.
I understand. The problem, okay, so I recognize that. I think that, first of all, and this is why we're having a one on one, when there are other people, like, I don't think Ozzy will bite on what was just said. Um, right? So there's that to consider, that, like, we were both, like, arguing with multiple people at the same
Yeah, of
time.
course.
But in a one on one setting, it's like, I can recognize that, I think we can both say yes, probably people have some misguided pattern recognitions that might make it so femininity and masculinity aren't like intrinsically linked. But as it currently stands, the way that like the social truth, the social understanding, or like the vast majority of people, this is how they think, right?
Mhm.
So that's fine, but then we go further, and then you start okay, so let's take it there. So how, if I say that, and then you say, well, most people think that, okay, I agree with you until now. But then when we started like analyzing this, we talked about what makes someone less or more of a woman or less or more of a man. And you talked about your paper
Yeah,
and
I
how in
reject
your
that that
paper,
is even a thing.
yes, yes. But here's the thing. You reject that that's even a thing, even though I believe that is literally what most people think. So here's the problem. Now you won't conform to the vast majority of people. Now you're asserting a statement and you're saying the truth is this. And that's, you know?
So I agree that there is a thing called femininity and there's a thing called womanhood, right? But that when we're talking about what makes a woman, we are talking about an overall concept. So similar with a chair, when we say, okay, well, generally we think that a chair has like 4 legs, a seat, a back, maybe some armrests on it, and it's made for one person to sit on. Well, if all of a sudden we say, okay, now it doesn't have 4 legs, now it has 8 wheels instead, is it less of a chair? Even though it doesn't fit like our prototype of the concept? No, that's not how people conceptualize things. It's still just as much of a chair as the other chair. This is how we conceptualize things. So when we look at the spectrum, we just label one side of the spectrum woman and the other side of the spectrum man. And as long as you fit within the concept, we just call you man or woman. We never say you are more or less of a woman or a man, unless we are like gatekeeping in some way, right? So somebody like, you know, what do you call it? Like Andrew Tate might say that somebody who is, who doesn't do X, Y, and Z is less of a man because they're not like, you know, if they don't work out and they don't have a lot of money and they don't fuck a lot of bitches, like they are less of a man, right? Sure. Somebody like that might
not a
say
real
that.
man.
Sure.
Yes.
But we don't actually conceptualize men in that way. We might gatekeep manhood in that way, but we don't actually look at somebody and say, oh, well, they don't have a freaking goatee and you know, sunglasses on and big muscles, so they're not as much of a man as that other guy over there. We don't really do that when we think of men and conceptualize them.
I don't think that's true. I think we absolutely, especially with the men, like do think he's not as much of a man. Like there's a reason why gay men are both considered by men and women to like be in the, and I do understand what you're saying. Like a gay man would still be a man. On the other hand, he's not considered a man in the same way that straight men are. But so I do understand that.
Well, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to make a delineation between being
Yes.
a man and manhood, right? There being a woman
Yes.
and womanhood. Like womanhood, yes, we will use womanhood to gatekeep. We will use manhood to gatekeep. But when we look at somebody, we automatically categorize them. And when we do that, we aren't actually gatekeeping in our heads. Like we do this like ideologically, but not, what do you call it?
So I'm with you. So here's the question. And here's something that really bothered me. When we were starting to test this, you said once you cross a certain masculinity line, now you're a man. Right?
Yeah.
So how does that sit in a non-contradiction with what we just talked about?
Same with a chair. Like chairs exist on a spectrum. Eventually chairs get so far away from the prototype or the archetype that we stop calling it a chair. But there are things that look so massively different from the prototype that we still call it a chair. And we don't say it's more or less of a chair. It's just a freaking chair.
Yes. So I agree with all of this. So here's the thing, right? And this is why I use the word schematic in like my paint thing. So like I'm not gonna mansplain like schemas to you, but I think you get what I'm going. So it's exactly that. Like things either fit into the schema or something, or they don't, and then they are something that is categorically different.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of variety within a schema, like birds. There are many different types of birds, but at the end of the day, something is a bird or it's not a bird, right? But again, and maybe I'm just being a bit slow here, so thank you for like being patient. If we are using masculinity and femininity on these things, how does okay, I guess let me process this. I guess I don't think it's on a spectrum in that way. I guess the way I understand schemas to be, there's like a checklist of like what it takes to have a chair.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like with mental health diagnosis. You'll have like 7 things that could be, and you have to check at least 4 to be that thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I look at it. So when it's a spectrum, it's kind of like when you go too far outside the spectrum, now you become this other thing. But I don't think it's true. It's about like if you don't tick enough boxes, and that's also how they categorize like sex as well. So
Mhm.
I'm not sure that spectrum is the and maybe it's a pedantic thing. Maybe it's a semantics issue here. But like when we
Well,
say
we're
when
talking about
something
semantics, so.
okay. So when we're talking about like being masculine enough to now fit into a different category, um, that just doesn't sit well with me because it doesn't make sense. Because
Correct.
under that definition, me saying that like for 2 weeks people perceived me as a guy would make me a guy by that standard, right? That we
Again,
talked about. Mm-hmm.
yes, again, we're just talking about the way people conceptualize it. So this is my issue when you said what I'm saying is transphobic. Only
Mm-hmm.
prescriptions can be transphobic. Like a descriptive reality cannot be transphobic. The fact that males and females exist isn't transphobic because we all acknowledge that they just do exist in reality. So me trying to describe how we conceptualize things in reality, that can't be transphobic if that is how we do it in reality. So
Okay.
I understand what
So
you're. Well, I wanted to respond
yes.
to the schematic thing. So I understand what you're saying, and this is like I describe this in my paper as well, is that a lot of people will think when they hear the way this is explained, they'll think, okay, so as soon as you have like 51% masculine traits and 49% feminine traits, that's when you've become a man. When it's not actually a math game. There are things called weighted characteristics. Some matter more
Yes.
than others, right?
Yes.
And so it's about the overall picture. The overall picture matters. So we can give you
Yes.
the archetype at the very beginning of the spectrum and put it as like Hulk Hogan and say, like, this is the archetype of masculinity. This is the most masculine thing you could possibly be. And then
Mm-hmm.
now, the less masculine characteristics, the farther you get from Hulk Hogan. I am no Hulk Hogan. I am very far away from Hulk Hogan, but I'm not less of a man. But I'm still not Hulk Hogan. I definitely have less masculine characteristics than Hulk Hogan, but I am not less of a man compared to Hulk Hogan. The It is not a math game because there might be a lot of things about him that are feminine. He might have more feminine characteristics than me, but the ones that we believe matter are the ones that he has. The ones that we see that have the most weight to them, the characteristics that have the most weight to them, those are all the ones that he has.
Yes. So, just to very quick, because I need to say this. So, when you do this thing, and maybe I, I'll take that on me if that's the case. But like, here's the thing: if you say, "Look, Nazis think that Jews are rats," then I wouldn't call you a Nazi, right? But if you are saying, "Hey, descriptively, Jews are rats," um, then I would call you a Nazi, right? So I think when I was saying this shit is transphobic, is because when you say this is how people are, and I always come from the perspective that, like, in this case, the perception of the way most people engage with this concept is like transphobic.
Mm-hmm.
Then you say this is how we are, this is how it is, then yes, of course, you're describing a transphobic reality. And I understand. So that's where that comes from, right?
I suppose I don't know that that's helpful at all, but okay. Um, like, just to be clear again, like, if I could choose a way for the world to be, this is not it. Like, this is not me, like, trying to tell people this is how I want things. And so you, like, seemed like offended when you're like, okay, so when I walk out into the world, people would just call me a guy. So you're saying I'm a guy. And I'm like, well, yeah, like, that's how people categorize you. So to them, yes, you are a guy. Like, I am, yes, I am just describing, like, the reality of how we categorize things and how we conceptualize things. And so but you do, I want to make sure, so you do understand, like, when I add in, like, weighted characteristics, that we can't really make it a math game of, like, more or less feminine characteristics. It's more of, like, just an overall
I'd
picture of a
still say
person, right?
it's a math game, but it's not a one quality versus one quality. Like someone said in my chat, right? Like Hulk Hogan wore makeup and tights for his entire career, and yet you still take him as like the epitome of manhood.
Yes.
So obviously, there are weighted characteristics that are taking precedence over the fact that there are quote unquote feminine things that he has done. Right?
Exactly. And that's why I'm saying he could actually have more feminine characteristics than me if we're doing a math game. But like the ones that matter, he has those.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do agree with you on that. Of course I do. Here's the thing though, right? So these weighted characteristics and the way that we define man and woman as like in the categories, here's where the transphobic thing came in, right? So if we're talking about strictly by the way that humans identify and catalog each other in that moment, obviously how a person is going to look at you and whether you pass or not if you're trans or whether you're cis or not, like, yes, for all intents and purposes, if I look like a boy to someone and they look at me and they perceive me as a boy, then at that moment I'm a boy until I'm going to open my mouth and a weighted characteristic of a feminine voice and a feminine like way of speaking is going to come out, and then they're going to experience some cognitive dissonance, and then they might either ask or they'll adjust their category, right? Correct. I agree with all of that, absolutely. What was bothering me, and again, this is just probably due to the fact that we were both like speaking to 3 other people at the same time, so it was unbearable, but like from the way that you made it sound, it was like I was basically arguing that the assessment is never just about like how someone sees you and that's it. It's obviously not, because a lot of weighted characteristics come actually after, right? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, you can add more characteristics is what you're saying. You can add more to the overall picture.
Well, yeah, because what I'm saying is that the picture is always going to be incomplete from just like a visual perception of another person, right?
Yes, but again, hold on. So we have to, this was my issue last night, we have to categorize things separately. So when we're talking about gender, we're talking about masculinity and femininity. But when we're talking about gender identity, we're talking about the way that you identify with masculinity and femininity. When we're talking about gender expression, we're talking about the way that you express masculinity and femininity. When we're talking about, it's not gender imposition, it's where like gender is forced on culture. I'm blanking on it right now. Damn it. Is there anybody in chat got...
Disposition?
No, it's where you get, like, where gender is kind of forced on a culture. Like, it's not gender roles, but where you're, like, socially reinforced.
Expectations?
Gendered expectations. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Gendered expectations. So yeah, so like gendered expectations are like the gender or the expectations that other people have on you because of your sex, and they are expecting femininity or masculinity from you.
Yeah. I need you. I'm now having a bit of cognitive dissonance, so I need you to walk me back through this. So when you're saying femininity and masculinity right now, and what you mean is the potentially flawed view of the vast majority of the culture around what they perceive to be these concepts. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, so like just traits and characteristics that are associated with males and females.
Yes, but those might be wrong. They'll still fit into the schema, but they might be wrong.
Correct.
Okay. So, yeah. So I think like whenever I have like resistance towards that is because like I think you know this about me, that I'm like very pedantic with sometimes my speech is very particular. So I think when you don't specifically like say that like what is perceived to be femininity or masculinity to a culture, so I have like an immediate like rejection of you just saying femininity and masculinity. And I also know that like from the first time that we talk, you said you don't want to give 1,000 caveats every time that you talk. I can feel my brain every time you say femininity and masculinity without that added like caveat, that I'm like immediately want to say no.
Yeah. So that's what, like, I feel like I'm already saying that when I say that we associate with males and females. I'm not saying this is what males and females do. I'm saying this is what we associate with males and females. So I feel like I'm already changing my language to where it's like it is making that obvious, because if I wanted to say this is what they do, I would just say this is what they do. Well, but instead I'm saying these are... Yeah, go ahead.
The problem is that when you say what we associate, you're not saying something in your language that implies that we could be wrong in the way we're associating things.
Well, no, it's not. You aren't wrong. You do associate it.
No, but I'm not saying that you're not associating it. I'm saying that like I can associate dogs with being more dirty than cats. I can associate like dogs being more of a health risk because they're dirty to humans, but actually cats have a lot more diseases that might hurt humans. So just because I associate something with something else doesn't mean that my association is correct. So I'm still associating, but the association might be wrong. That's what I'm saying.
So give me an example with gender that makes this hard for you, that you believe is not a real pattern, but people believe the pattern is there and therefore associate it.
Yeah, like leadership being a masculine trait, right?
So do you think men or males are more often in leadership roles?
They objectively are, yes.
So the pattern exists. So they're not incorrectly associating that they are objectively more often in leadership roles. So yes, the pattern does exist.
They are associating it to the fact that there are males in roles. That's not the same as it feeding into the scheme. Wait, because we did all of this and I need to integrate this. So you're saying,
because last night you kept making it sound like I was saying if something is feminine, it's biologically feminine. And that's what I was fighting against the entire night, is like, no, it's not biologically feminine. And so every time you were fighting against things being feminine, it felt like, no, it didn't feel like you were fighting against it being biological. And so when you say things like, well, leadership role isn't, like, it's almost fallacious for us to think that it's a masculine trait. Well, no, it's not fallacious at all. Males actually are more often in leadership roles. It actually is a pattern that exists. But you're fighting against it being a biological thing, which I'm already saying that that's not the case. And I don't think most people believe that that's the case, or that gender is necessarily biological, because we would say carrying a purse is feminine, but we wouldn't say carrying a purse is biological.
So I think I understand what the problem is. So, what keeps happening is this. You have constructed a logically consistent way of like defining and using terms, and I can work within that realm. But because we are not just speaking like you and I, and we're talking to other people, and words obviously do mean approximately kind of different things to different people. While I can understand your framework, because this is the space that we're engaging, or maybe, no, I'm not going to blame the audience. Maybe because of what I strongly understand and have my own like emotional biases about what the words masculinity and femininity means. There's always going to be cognitive dissonance. So it's kind of like, it's a bit kind of like if you, if like I know what the word Nazi is, but then we sit in a conversation and we decide that the word Nazi just means dogs. We're just referring to dogs as Nazis now, you know? And then you're going to like have a lot of cognitive dissonance in that conversation as you discuss dogs, because you're like, there's a loaded term and you have to use it in a different definitional context, you know? So I think that's like the issue, because I don't perceive I don't understand the terms that are femininity and masculinity to be like things that males or females do a lot. I like fundamentally like reject that, right? Because my definition of femininity is and masculinity is like certain concepts that are socially enforced upon us to conform to.
They're
right?
prescriptive.
What do you mean?
They're prescriptive, meaning that they're not just things that are, they are things that you are told to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the issue.
Yes.
That, like,
so this is a radical feminist framework that started with the second sex, is where they describe gender as only things that you are told to do. That is what gender is. It is just what you're told. But the definitions that we currently work with just don't ever actually include prescriptions. They're just like, they include prescriptions, but they're not only prescriptions. And so that makes a lot of sense, because yeah, like I said, I felt like I was fighting against biology and prescriptions the entire night, after like caveating a million times. Like, I'm not talking about biology, not talking about prescriptions. That was still what I was fighting against. But the second sex type of definition actually makes like perfect sense.
Okay. So yeah, and I'm going to have to like, I guess
this is my issue with Boots as well. Like, Boots literally like was fighting me on what gender is, and then it came down to she believes gender is prescriptive and not descriptive.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. If you work for a feminist framework, you're most likely going to encounter something like that from a feminist framework, right? So that tracks. I guess like something to consider also is that, since like a lot of feminist advocacy, but also any type of advocacy, is about like raising awareness. So like challenging words and challenging language. Like, I think one of the things that got me really hated in like the Destiny space, for example, is because I am very particular about use of language. I think that's why Erudite is upset with me as well, because like, you know, that thing where we started this conversation and you said like, I kept telling you what I'm saying, and like I kept reiterating what you were saying, Katie, and you say no. It's because
Yes.
like when I say things, I'm like actually quite try to be very cognizant of the language that I use, because I believe that like language can really shape minds and opinions.
Hmm.
So when people take what I say and they reiterate it in a way that I feel is like negatively loaded against the prescription that I'm making, then I'll
Hmm.
say no, because you just used a word that I wouldn't use, because now it's like reinforcing a stereotype, for example, you know?
Yeah.
And then people are like, oh, you don't get what I'm saying, or like you're being bad faith. And it's like, I just use language in a very particular way, and it's purposeful.
I
That's
mean,
why that was
I,
like the main disagreement with Destiny.
I don't feel like I do that though. Like when I try to like
No.
repeat somebody's stuff back to them, I try to repeat it in a way that they would agree with. And then when I
Yeah.
repeat it in a way that you would agree with, like not negatively loaded, not in a way that's going to make it easier for me to argue against you or anything like that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you
yeah.
still disagree with it, my mind breaks where I'm like, I don't know what I'm arguing against now. Like I have no idea what I'm arguing against. And then a couple
Yeah.
minutes later, you say exactly what I think I just said, and now I just like I'm in a rage. Like I don't know if she's doing this on purpose. I don't know if she's like messing with me. I have no idea what's happening here.
Yeah, like I think you're usually very good at not doing that with me. Like I that's why I enjoy talking to you, because you seem to really jive with the way that I talk, which is very helpful. But again, like I think that like if definitionally, like conceptually, you work from and like that was my frustration as well with you, that it felt like you were saying like all that it matters is how people see this issue, and I'm like, no, it matters why they see that issue, right? And that's what
Yeah,
we
sure.
kept like coming heads on. um
So
but yeah, it,
somebody on the panel said, I think it was, I think it was Jube, or yeah, I think it was Jube, where he's saying Tom like systematically goes through things and he's not going to allow you to skip a step. You have to cover A before you talk about B. And um and that's kind of where I was in the conversation last night. Is I'm not going to talk to you about gender if neither one of us are talking about the same thing, or we don't even understand what the other person's talking about. So I'm happy to talk about prescriptions. I'm happy to talk about like, you know, why we think things are the way that they are, or why gender is, or how it could be, or any of these things. But we first have to agree on what it is and what we're talking about and what we're changing in order to have those other conversations.
okay, wait,
And
I'm having a pedantic moment. When you say what it is, what you mean is how people conceptualize it, not what it actually is.
I'm saying there isn't an objective thing except for how we conceptualize it. There is no objective
Um
gender. That gender is
well,
just the
yes,
patterns.
yes. Well, yes, in the sense that like the way that what I say is the real thing is also just another type of conceptualization. Like it's just a different social construct than how most people see it as a social construct. So like,
Right.
yes, I agree that there isn't like an objective found in nature thing. It's just like different ways to conceptualize. So I'll phrase it differently. Um, you when you say what gender is, you want to work with the common generalized normative like definition, or like how most people perceive it, like the basically the normative prescription, uh this
For the most
the
part.
normative conceptualization.
Yeah, for the most part. So when it like I was talking about this earlier, I started studying gender because when I got into Twitch politics and I started streaming over there, every single panel that I went on to had numerous trans people. I'd never met a trans person in my entire life. Never, never, ever, never even seen one. All of a sudden, I'm meeting like 30, 40 a month, and it was crazy. And every panel that I went on to eventually devolved into a conversation about gender, which I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
To me, it was the same thing as sex. So I had no clue what they were talking about. So I would sit and listen every time and ask a lot of questions. And I really wanted to understand it because it seemed like every person that I asked questions to gave me very different answers. So I started to want to learn about this. With my background in language, I thought that this was going to be a lot of fun. Very quickly realized everything that they all say is so insanely incoherent and different from the way that gender is like actually conceptualized. So I started digging into it more and more and more, and reading more books and reading more studies and understanding it better and better. And then eventually I wanted to be able to like broadcast this understanding and help others with it as well. Not to say this is what gender has to be, but to say if you'd like to have a conversation about gender, you got to have a starting place. And this is going to help you have conversations about gender. So if you want to say, this is how I want gender to change, this is what I would like it to be, this is what I, these are the prescriptions, these are the policies, whatever. Like, you have to start with a foundation of what it is you're talking about in order to get to those other things. And so that's how I ended up.
Hear me out.
Yeah.
Do you see a certain and this isn't a criticism, I'm just interested if you perceive it the way that I do. So there, like when Jube said that you're very like systematic and stuff like that, it's interesting because the way that you want us, like the basics that you want us to agree on are all like, let's all understand how the vast majority of people conceptualize this concept. However, that system and the way that you systematically go through things and want to define them is not the way the vast majority of people like approach conversations.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so like I just found it interesting because in a way, when you're doing that, you're challenging an entire room of people who are used to engaging in conversation in a lot more intuitive and less systematic way. And not just systematic, it's just like also you appeal to like the normative perception of things.
Well, so I mean,
that is like the base definition you want to start working off of.
well, kind of. So the main problem that I found is that if we actually go with like okay, gender is masculinity and femininity, and this is a part that like a lot of people start to separate on. It's where they get confused, right? But when we think about womanhood, it is going to be based on characteristics of femininity. And when we think of somebody transitioning, we think of them transitioning feminine characteristics about themselves and the way that they present. When we think about somebody's presentation, their identity, it's about how they identify with masculine or feminine things. And so that was like where the big separation was. And it made everything else make sense as soon as that made sense. So like even this, like once I started learning that like when we say gender is on a spectrum, that's actually a linguistic term. It's about like linguistic philosophy. So when other people use it, they think that it's meant to be inclusive, but it's not meant to be inclusive. It's actually a word for a concept that doesn't have hard barriers on it. And so we're able to like understand that there is more or less of that thing. And that was so eye-opening for me to realize that like a lot of people thought the way that they were using this language was meant to just be progressive and inclusive, and that if they say a trans woman is a woman, they're just saying that to be nice. Whereas there is a reality to the language that we're using that actually means a trans woman is a woman.
Yeah.
And so that was
I don't say it to be nice. It's just like a subcategory of woman. That's how the language is.
Right. But even if you say it is a subcategory of a woman, a lot of other people don't even know what that even means. What does it mean to be a subcategory of a woman if you don't know what it means to be a woman? And so this was just like the building blocks were insanely important because the foundation leads into it intertwines into every other part of this and makes it all make perfect sense as soon as you get the foundation correct. And so yeah, I wrote like an entire document using like science to back it up, using philosophical linguistics. I've got it up on my screen right now. Like I've got pictures of the spectrum. I've got pictures of the chair spectrum. I've got like a million examples on there.
So
I list off all the books that I read. Yeah. Go.
Is it possible that so is it that you don't want to conform your language to your understanding that most people wouldn't use language the way that you do?
I'm saying that this is how most people use language. And that is like what I'm talking about. So like that's what most of my document
No,
is
but
about.
they're not. But you enter these conversations. You enter conversations, and you want people to all get on the same page as you are.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because again, you're appealing to like the normative majority, and yet you reject the normative majority in your actions, like when you advocate for these, what you don't advocate, but like when you argue about these things.
Yeah, so when we're talking about language, like I'm not there are some things that will change based on the context, but very rarely. When we're talking about gender, and especially in these spaces, we're trying to talk about this in an academic sense. So there are appeals that we're going to make in this sense. So when we have to, like, when we were after the panel, I was listening to you guys, and one of the things you kept saying is, like, everybody here agreed except for Tom, yet he refused to acclimate to us. That just wasn't true.
Yeah.
Like, me, Jube, Aaron, who was there were 4 or 5 people on there who all agreed with my definition. They disagreed on like other semantical parts about like how we come to definitions or whether or not etymology matters or like a bunch of other random things. But they all agreed with the definition. And I can even like give sources on the definition, because if we disagree on a definition, we now have to argue why one definition should be used over the other. And I can do that. I can do that all day long. I can actually make an argument for why my definition is going to be a better definition. And sometimes my definition isn't always the best definition. Somebody else's makes more sense. And then we go with that. In this case, I have mounds of authorities, mounds of dictionaries, mounds of other things that will lead you to the same conclusion as me. And so, yeah, I'm going to like fight for that understanding of it, because everything that follows is based on that understanding. Like, in order to have any sort of conversation afterwards, everything, like I said before, the foundation is what made everything afterwards make sense.
But is that true? So if you had conformed in your language to do a caveat for my like autistic brain, and just go like every time you say femininity and masculinity, just go the way that people might like associate inaccurately something, and then you'd say, well, they don't, they're associating the patterns that they see, and I mean like that, acknowledging that the patterns might be unuseful or like an over recognition.
I could have, but I asked you why you disagreed with what I was saying. And you said, because I don't believe gender is biological. And I said, me neither. But you said, yeah, but for me, that means I'm not going to use it the way that you are. And I kept saying,
that's
but
not true.
I'm not using it the way that you think I'm using it. And that's what the football analogy was I was saying, I can think that some aspects of gender are are downstream from biology, or like that they are influenced by biology, but the definition has nothing to do with biology. So if I found out that those characteristics had nothing to do with biology, it still wouldn't change the definition. It still wouldn't change whether it's masculine or feminine. As long as it's associated with males or females, it's masculine or feminine. So then I gave the football analogy where I said, Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like maybe there was a miscommunication. So I felt um throughout the entire thing, so way before you and I started arguing that way, that I was like, you now know what I mean when I say that I don't think gender is a real thing. I mean, I think gender is a construct enforced upon us. So I don't think it's like found within us. I think it is taught to us, right? That's what I mean when I say gender isn't a real thing. Um, so when I said that, and when I believe that, and that's the framework that I'm working on, I felt
Mhm.
like the entire panel, I was still engaging or trying to engage with the concept of gender out of the perspective that most people feel like that's not true. Like
But my
Ozzy
point is
and
that when
Dave.
I asked you why you disagreed, you literally said numerous times, because I don't believe it's biological. You said that
Yes,
numerous
Tom, but
times.
that was off. That was off me talking to Ozzy and trying to hear his perspective on something. And then
I
I
understand. I
said
understand.
one
I'm saying,
time,
I get it. I'm saying that I could not make a caveat to that because that was already caveated to in my definition. So for me, there wasn't a way for me to caveat to what you were saying because I already agreed with that. And so that's what I ended up arguing against for a very long time after that, is that you're saying I'm not going to call it this because of X. And I'm saying, but I don't believe in X and I'm still calling it this. So how does that make a difference? And that was the confusion for me for the rest of the
mm-hmm,
panel. And you kept
yeah,
asking
yeah,
me,
yeah,
but how does this
yeah.
lead back to biology? But how is this
It makes the
biological?
difference. It makes the difference for me because then you're using language that is enforcing a certain negative concept that I'm trying to argue against, and
But
you
that's
didn't.
prescriptive.
Yes, yes. Um, I yeah. I think we both understand like what happened.
Yes. But my
um,
point is that at the time, there's no way that I could have caveated because I didn't have that information.
yeah, I understand that. Also, like, question. Um, how does the femininity masculinity framework? Wait, no, I actually know this answer now. If femininity and masculinity only means like what men and women do, or like what females and males do, then
Or
like
what
under
is we
this
associate with
framework,
them.
what?
Or what we associate with males and females.
Yeah, yeah. That would make, because I was gonna say that like children aren't feminine or masculine, but under this understanding of feminine and masculine, they would be when they engage with female or male associated traits. So
They would
like
have
when
like
a 3-year-old
presentation
girl
wise.
cries, that would be feminine.
Yeah, like presentation wise, yes.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Um okay, yeah, I understand. Like at least that's consistent. That's like the important part. Cuz if you were going to, cuz here's the thing that's frustrating though. Most people wouldn't feel comfortable calling toddlers feminine or masculine, right? But under your definitions of feminine or masculine, when a 2.5-year-old is playing soccer and he's a boy, he's engaging in a he's being masculine.
Well,
He's engaging in a masculine activity.
you mean most leftists. I think most people have no issue calling like a newborn baby masculine or feminine, but I think leftists have issues
Oh,
calling them masculine and feminine.
oh yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry. People who don't have weird projection onto children. Okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, I take that. Yes, I understand. Good, good catch. Good. Okay, good. Okay. Do you feel better?
Yeah, I think so.
I feel
I
better too.
let me So I did want to address this because this is what broke my brain during the panel. Okay. So
Okay.
when I say I don't believe that gender is biological, and you say I'm not going to I don't believe in gender because I don't believe it's biological. I said, okay, well, what about Walmart? Walmart's not biological. Do you not believe in Walmart now? And then you said, well, no, but you are associating gender back to biology. And I said, well, I'm saying some characteristics might be influenced by biology. And you said, yes, that's the same thing. That's why I don't acknowledge this. And I said, okay. So I also believe that football is influenced by biology. But if I found out it wasn't, I wouldn't stop calling it football. Does that make sense to you now?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So if you say,
Thank you.
I don't believe in what you're calling gender because I don't believe it's biological. And I said, okay, I don't believe it's biological either. But let's say I believe football has a biological influence to it, that men are more likely to play football because they're males. And you say that you don't. Does that mean that you would stop calling it football? That like
But
the
why is
definition of football doesn't actually have anything to do with biology. The definition of football, totally unrelated to biology. It might be influenced by biology, but if it turned out it wasn't influenced by biology, it wouldn't change what football means. Just as gender might be influenced by biology, but if it turned out it wasn't, doesn't matter. The definition
yes,
has nothing to do with
yes.
biology.
That's because we were still working off. That's when like, because here's the thing that was throwing me into a loop.
I'm
You
just
would
asking if that
sometime-
makes sense now.
It makes sense to me now,
Okay.
but it's because you felt like I was only harping about the biological thing. And it was because every time we tried to move away to like social construction of gender as it's like divorced from biology, you would bring up some weird biological crap like the aggression thing, right? It's like when you were trying to help Ozzy and you were giving Ozzy like things that would perpetually be masculine or feminine, you brought up things that are biologically tied, right? So
Okay.
that was like a really big barrier there.
So that's great. Okay, so let's do that then. Okay. So that the reason I brought that up is because I don't believe in gender abolition, because I believe there are some biological factors that will always result in some patterns that we will recognize afterwards. And as long as there are some patterns that we will recognize between males and females, gender will still exist to some extent.
Why?
Because we will recognize the patterns.
But why does gender have to exist in that respect and not just sex? I agree sex will remain. I don't know why that inherently necessitates the remaining of gender.
So if we do have small differences within our brains that result in different interests or different like characteristics, different personality traits that are more likely between males and females, we will observe those differences. And those differences are not biology, right? They are just more likely because of biology, but they are not biology. So let's say, just as a hypothetical, let's say women actually did like the color pink more because there's something in their brain that attracts them to the color pink, right?
Okay.
Well, if they still wear pink more and decorate their stuff with pink more often, that is not biology. Them decorating their stuff with pink is not biology. That's gender.
Okay, I understand that perspective. So here's my thing on it. Because I can understand that some gender construct are like informed by biology, but they're not like inherently tied. So like I'd basically say that the reason why you would say that gender will continue to exist is because people are going to, what people are trying to maintain is a gender binary because there's a sex binary. But you could look at it, you wouldn't have to look at it as like women do decorate more with pink. You could say, like this demographic of, okay, I see what you're saying. It's because you're saying that it will be informed by sex. Yes, so I disagree. I think that in a gender, if we did like an experiment and had a form of like a gender abolished world, differences of biology would result in different categories. I believe we would have like a different concept. We wouldn't call it gender, but it would be like pissy people versus non-pissy people, or like it would probably fall more into like introverts versus extroverts, stuff like that. I don't believe it would fall across what we consider to be gender lines or like sex lines. I think there are other biological factors who influence behavior much more than the stuff that influence so-called gender-related things. So I think the categories we would use would be very different, and they wouldn't fall across sex lines, so gender wouldn't exist. That's what I'm saying.
We already have enough characteristics with sex that are so obvious that we will continue to relate things back to that. So just being bigger, having square jaws, having bigger muscles, being taller, like those are already enough for us to visually characterize these two as separate things. And so as long as the sexes are characterized as two separate things, we will relate things back to them as two separate things. And those two separate things, when we acknowledge those patterns will be labeled as something. So even if we didn't call it gender, it would still be gender.
Mm-hmm.
So we would just
but I'd argue
gender
that would be sex.
Else.
So I'd argue like the differences between like females and males would just be categorized as like we wouldn't stop using female and male because of those very obvious biological lines.
Right, but I'm saying stuff like wearing pink, like that isn't sex, right? That's not biology.
Yes, but I don't believe wearing pink would fall across sex lines in a gender abolished society.
I don't either. I'm saying that there would be things like that. So
but I don't necessarily agree with that because like
let me caveat. I don't know that that's true, but it seems to be true based on the information that we have right now. So like we do know that there are small differences between our brains once we have estrogen or testosterone flowing through them, and we end up with different interests and are attracted to different types of things. So like even watching football, men have some difference in their brains that makes them actually attracted to the like physicality of football. Now, does that mean women will never watch football? No, of course not. Women love football. They enjoy watching it. It's a fun sport to watch. But men will be more likely to watch football. And so that difference right there, it's not sex, because it's a totally different thing.
No, so like, I hear you. I can respect that. As long as you're saying like, hey, I don't know this is true. This is just my prediction. Like, that's valid.
That
I just have a different prediction.
That we currently have is what I'm saying. Based on the best information that we currently have, we know that we believe that those differences will still exist.
I disagree with that.
Okay.
For sure.
So this is why I was saying, like like when I bring on Luann Brizendine, like she is the person who wrote the male brain and the female brain. And we're going to have her on for an interview. She is a world-renowned biologist and is like literally wrote the book on the things that we're talking about. And this is where I'm getting my information from. Some of it's outdated in her actual books, so she has a bunch of updates and information since then. But like this is when I say like it's not just her, just like biologists in general, there seems to be a consensus that testosterone and estrogen lead to us having different interests.
Then why do a bunch of other neuroscientists have like called out her book and she got a lot of flack for it?
So, because there were some things that she got wrong. She did get some things wrong, yes. But her book overall was not like a failure. Like it was a massively helpful book, especially in the way that she wrote it, because she starts off with like an embryo developing and then over time growing and then being born and then going through puberty and then becoming an adult and like all of the processes of your brain changing. But at the time that she wrote it, her book was accurate. Over time, there were things that changed within like the consensus on biology, and she admitted to a bunch of changes and things that she got wrong, and has like she didn't change her book, but like, you know, she's come out with updates to say like, yes, these things turned out to be wrong, these things turned out to be wrong. So yeah.
So, like, how does it work for when you say that you're informed by this book? It was written in 2006 and have obviously had stuff wrong in it. Are you then also saying that you're obviously not operating word for word by the book, but you're taking into account the corrections?
I thought it was 2014. Am I wrong? Hold on. It was 2012. Okay.
What 2012?
This is July
Which one?
11th, 2012. Oh, no, yeah, it is 2006. Maybe there's an updated version, because this white version is not what I read.
Yeah, so the originally published is 2006. And that's the author. And that got like a lot of flack because it's inaccurate.
Yeah, so anyways, anytime you read a book, you should always look up criticisms of it or updates that they have afterwards, or like do you know who no, is it Noah Harari is?
Yeah, the guy who wrote the 2 really successful books, right?
Yes.
About like the history of mankind, whatever.
Yes, Sapiens,
Yeah.
such a good book. He also got things wrong, and he like updates his stuff and admits to the things that he got wrong and crap like that. Like, you should always look up criticisms of books afterwards, and
especially with stuff with science. Science is going to evolve and change, right?
Yes. Yeah. So like, by far the majority of the things, especially like in the way things develop, in the way that things are, like, that's going to be important. But and this is what I like when I messaged her. I told her, I said, I engage in a very far left community that doesn't even believe in the brain differences within between males and females, and so this is like especially what I would like to get into. And she's like, this is exciting, I'd love to come talk about it. So it might be a couple more months until we can actually get her on, but yes, it's like, so when she wrote it, I think one of the differences, when she was talking a lot about gray matter and the differences that males and females are born with. Now, one of the updates is that she doesn't know that the differences are actually in the gray matter. That like we don't actually know for a fact that those differences that are what we're born with. But the differences that testosterone and estrogen give our brains, we do know about those differences, and we did know about them at the time. And I think especially like society is complicated. And so the more things that we have to engage with, the more those differences will show. So they could actually be just such minuscule differences within our brains. But because society has just so many things for us to engage with, those differences can show in a multitude of ways that we are not even aware of. Like, there could be things that we could categorize that we just aren't even aware of right now.
Yes. Okay. We feel better, yes?
Yes, I feel much better. You feel much better?
I feel better too, yes.
Good.
Thank you for kicking off the people from the horrible Andrew Tate conversation. It was so bad.
I was insanely triggered for days, so I was
Oh, by the way,
dying.
Maybe you can now explain yourself. So I feel when you come to Sixth Defense and you go like, guys, we're just saying that these obvious points are obvious. You're doing the thing, right? Like, when people are saying like
they were saying that they were obvious, though. They were saying that those obvious points were obvious.
Okay. Hear me out.
Okay.
There's a certain method to doing things, especially getting vulnerable, dumb people to believe dumb things, right? So it is a very known tactic that sprinklings...
The Tate brothers are experts in this freaking area. Like, they are very good at it.
Okay, good. So like, yes, it is very known that if you sprinkle a bit of truth to attract people, you can then add a lot of other conspiratorial shit or whatever, and because you've said like a sprinkle of truth, people will gravitate onto that. So I don't understand your so when you do the whole, like, if I say Hitler had a nice mustache, like, I'm not saying Hitler is good, and it's like, no. But when you build a certain like, it is weird to get upset that people are wary of that technique when it comes to really bad people, right? Like, if somebody feels the need to say that Hitler had a very nice mustache, it is reasonable to ask yourself why they are doing that when we know what Hitler is, you know? So when people are praising Andrew Tate for basically pointing out capitalism, and then profiting off the backs of that, why am I supposed to like clap for the pointing out of feminism? Of capitalism, sorry.
So Andrew Tate did bring a lot of value to people, and people did gravitate towards him because there were things valuable about him. It's like when we say, like, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in Jesus, but religion gives people something that secularism cannot. It has this higher power aspect to it that allows people to hand over control, and they need that in order to get through rough times a lot of times, especially for addiction and crap like that. I can still acknowledge that believing in religion a lot of times can lead to horrible beliefs that is like ends up having horrible outcomes for other people, but I'm not going to not deny these other parts that are obviously very valuable to them.
Okay, so when you say valuable, you obviously you mean like it has value to someone, but it's like the thing of like one man's treasure is like one man's garbage is another man's treasure kind of thing. So what people
no. So I'm saying that, so like to latch that onto Andrew Tate, there is a crisis of masculinity for men. There are men who feel lost. There are men who feel like they don't know where to go in the world. There are women who are rising up, doing really well. And there are so many social norms that are displacing men right now. And so Andrew Tate filled this void for a lot of men that told them the way that things should be and gave them hope for something. It was this like, you know, light at the end of a tunnel that they were looking for. And it's not the right light. But to acknowledge that the light is there is troublesome, because this is what a lot of people do, is they deny that Andrew Tate gave anybody any sense of value whatsoever and filled any void for them whatsoever. And it kind of shows that the left cannot fill those voids when they deny those sorts of things.
But that, again, it's a semantics thing. This is why I said, like, a one man's garbage is another man's treasure. It's like from the position of, like, when you say value, you mean, I can say that religion is absolute garbage and is bad, but I still recognize that it holds, like, an incredibly important role in a lot of people's lives, and that it is incredibly valuable to them. But I can find like the gun who killed my mother valuable. I can still say that, right? So
yeah, but that's why I was trying to delineate it, is I'm saying that, like, just because I don't want to drive a Toyota doesn't mean that I'm going to deny that it has value. It's not my personal preference. I'm not for it, but I'm not going to deny its value to you. I don't want to drive it. I think it looks ugly. I would rather have a freaking Viper or a Lamborghini.
But here's the thing, right? And this is what I meant earlier with tactics. So when you say something is valuable and you're saying that to an audience, you are signifying to that audience, like when you say, oh, I might not agree with Andrew Tate, but surely his positions are like his contribution is valuable, you are signifying to people that there's something meaningful there. But that's not actually what you mean. You just mean a lot of people gravitated towards this, just the same that a lot of people gravitated towards the Nazi Party once they
No,
rose to power.
again,
You
that
know,
is
like,
not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there is something there that other people need to use. There is something there that if the left could take those same things and attach their values to it, it would be awesome. But they deny that for that initial value, and therefore they cannot do this. They are incapable of doing it because they deny their initial value.
But Tom, I maybe I misunderstood you. It sounds like the value that you say is that he was appealing to a mass audience, and he was appealing to a mass audience by using deceitful tactics and harping
That is
on
not what I'm saying.
misogynistic sentiments in people. So, okay, then explain to me what you're saying.
Okay, so people need to feel like they belong to something. They need to feel like there is a light at the end of the tunnel. If there are things that are actually troubling them, they need to see a solution to that, okay? They also need to feel like they are the thing that they identify with. This isn't just a thing for trans people. This is a thing that all people want to feel. All people have gender. All people want to feel that gender, and they want to feel respected and comfortable in that gender. And Andrew Tate was capable of giving them value to things that they saw as invaluable and that everybody around them didn't recognize as valuable. But he was able to give that to them. Other people can still do this and give men value, make them feel respected and make them feel real and make them feel seen. They can still do this, but they don't. They don't see that that's what Andrew Tate is doing. They see the like, you know, the outside things that value leads to,
but Tom,
but the value is still real.
You have yet to quantify. You're saying that he's doing it, but yes, obviously he is, but you're saying the left should do it too. And my argument is, when you look at what he is doing to provide that value, you will realize that the reason why people don't do it, it is because it is antithetical to very important values.
Okay.
That's what I'm asking us to examine what he's actually doing to provide that value.
Yes, but that's what I am saying the value is real. You keep saying one man's treasure is another man's garbage. I'm saying no, this is is
that's
gold.
not what I mean when I say that. I mean that's how people react when you say the value is real. I understand that he's valuable to people. I'm saying he's valuable to people for a reason, and that reason is bad actually. That's what I'm saying.
But
I'm not contending that there's value.
I'm saying the reason is not bad, but the things it leads to is bad. So he's able to use that value.
Let's examine the actual reason. You still haven't done that.
I don't know what you're looking for then. I feel like I've given that to you over and over.
Okay. What is it that Andrew Tate does that makes people feel value in him? You said he gives them masculinity.
Yes, he reaffirms them, he makes them feel valuable, he gives them ways to he tells them how to be successful. He starts to make them feel like they are part of a group and make them feel like they belong to something. He's able to talk down to them in a fatherly way that makes them feel like they are like they have like almost a father figure telling them like, you're bad, but you can do better, you can be better than this. And it gives them like hope, and it makes them feel like these are just things that the left just does not do. They don't do this, and they like, on the left, we do a very good job of affirming women, and it's important, like, and there's a good reason for that. But through this process, we have left young men behind. Young men growing up today do not feel what men my age felt. They did not get that. The reaffirmation, the you are the freaking god, you're the king of the jungle, like you can do anything. They did not get that crap. And so now
Should people get that crap?
women get that crap for sure. Women do, and like they get it in a lot of different ways. And
Did women get that before?
no.
Okay. So,
And that's what I'm saying. It makes sense that we went in this direction, but that we have to correct course now.
okay, but what I'm saying is that I do not want anyone to think they are king of the jungle. I am not for girl boss shit either, although I understand why it is happening. It's coming off like decades of very much not being the case. Here's the thing. Like, when you describe what Andrew Tate does to appeal to young men, I'm going to say this, and it's not, I'm just not going to caveat it. At the end of the day, he appeals to old versions of traditional masculinity. He appeals to misogynistic notions of women that are appealing to young men because of their frustrations. He appeals to tribalism, and like infantilized thinking, like a daddy figure. So it seems like you're saying that the left should deploy tribalism, cult-like vibes of like a father figure, and like using stereotypical tropes of other marginalized groups to appeal to the biases of the target demographic. And I hope you understand that all those things are incompatible with the left.
No, I don't think. I think that's I think you're taking what I said and then putting it into like the worst words possible, and that's just
I
not.
know.
You can do
That
all
was
of
the
the things
caveat
that
I was
I
going to
said
do.
without doing that, though, and so you are just taking what I'm saying and straw manning it to hell.
No, I don't mean to strawman it. Here's the thing. You can describe tribalism in a different way. What you're describing is still tribalism.
Yes, I'm okay with tribalism.
Okay. So tribalism is fine. So what did I say that felt strawman?
That we would do this like in a misogynistic way, that we would do this in a racist way, that we would like reinforce stereotypes, like those sorts of things.
I feel like Andrew Tate absolutely got, at least when I started hearing of Andrew Tate, was when a lot of his clips talking about women came out.
I'm not saying he did these things in the right way. I'm saying that he did those things and they have value, and the left can do those things without all of the straw man versions that you added on to it.
But Tom, what I'm saying is that his appeal was specifically because he did that, or like did those things specifically. That is my. Let me finish, please. I swear to God. Like, I don't think Andrew Tate would be as popular as he is if he wasn't specifically harping on extremely misogynistic rhetoric against women. Do you?
No. But that's not the same thing. You are taught. I don't know how you're like disconnecting things so much. Nothing I mentioned was that. And I've acknowledged over and over that there are aspects to how he did it that are bad. That doesn't mean that the valuable parts are invaluable.
No, but I'm saying that the valuable part is that, Tom.
Okay, it's not. It is the tribalism. It is the reinforcements. It is the affirmation. It
Reinforcements
is.
of what? When I say reinforcement of traditional masculinity, I mean obviously hearkening to sexism. Yes, that's a big part of traditional masculinity. Traditional um, masculine roles, traditional manly roles. Yes, I am the father, I am the protector, I'm the breadwinner, I'm the king of the jungle.
Yes, and I'm
Yes,
saying
it's very
that
appealing.
you don't have to do it in a sexist way. You can give both
Okay, give
sides
me an
the same
example.
affirmation. You can give both sides this feeling of like I'm awesome, I'm great, men are awesome, men are great without saying that women suck. You can do that. That is perfectly
Yes, you
good and
can.
valuable, and we should do
Yes,
that, and we don't
we
do
should.
that.
Yes. I don't yeah, I mean I agree that we don't do that with men a lot. Sure. Yeah. I don't
Okay.
like the whole women are great and men suck either, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Um
Yes, I'm saying that there are parts of these things that are valuable, that he took them to extremes that, yes, obviously made him more popular and brought in a lot more people, but
yeah,
we can
I think
we
that
can
a
learn from
lot
that.
of the I think that the parts that we have to learn are stuff that we already knew and are maybe not good at. But at the end of the day, I think his appeal always comes down to um to the fact that he was utilizing those negative things. And the fact that you are separating that is um I mean, if all you're saying is yes, we should appeal to a bit of tribalism and you go boy mentality, then sure, yeah. That's not the Andrew Tate thing though. That's not what he's selling.
That is
He's
part
selling way
of what
more than
he is
that.
selling. Way more, yes.
Okay. So yes, we should learn from people who are good at media. Yes. Okay.
Not just that you're dumbing this down to like such reductive levels. I
Because the only useful things that we can learn from Andrew Tate um are those
It's like if I
because
tell you about all the valuable parts of religion and then you're like, yeah, we should make people belong. Good job. Like
literally yes.
that's not, yeah, that's such an oversimplification. Like that's not an easy thing to do. And if we
No,
had an
it's not
easy
an
way to
easy
just
thing to
replace
do.
religion, we would have done that, but we can't because it has so many other aspects to it that nothing else does.
Yes, I agree with that. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do. I'm not saying that we have a replacement. But yes, what religion comes out at the end of the day is spiritual guidance, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of not having to contend with existential crisis, having moral guidance, and that whole package deal. Yes, of course. Yes, I understand that. That's why it's valuable. That's why it's meaningful. That's why most people have it. Um, at the end of the day, if I wanted something different from religion, I just have to be these are the see, but I wouldn't want to give people spiritual guidance. But
Yeah, but I'm saying
yes,
that you wouldn't
feeling of
also turn
belonging,
around and just
feeling
say,
of meaning.
yes, I'm saying that you wouldn't turn around and just be like, okay, cool, yeah, we should make it to where people belong. Like, that's an oversimplification.
Didn't I just say that? Okay. Sure.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying is with Andrew Tate, like you are oversimplifying what we're talking about to, like,
I think we went over this and I don't want to loop it, but I feel like you either are not really um I don't know if you haven't from the things that you broke down to me, it sounded like a lot of what is left that isn't toxic and bad and is meant to manipulate people is the notion of just make people not feel bad about themselves, which yeah, sure.
sure.
I
So,
agree with that.
okay, so just now that we've covered the valuable part, now I have a lot of people in my audience who like Andrew Tate, who watched Andrew Tate, who were big Andrew Tate fans. Probably not much anymore, but they're here because initially I talked about Andrew Tate in a fair way, in a way that they saw Andrew Tate, in a way that they thought was valid, while also being critical of him and disagreeing with the things that he said. But if we come in and we're just like, no, there's absolutely no redeeming qualities about this guy, we should never say anything nice about him because now we're reinforcing his bad ideology, yeah, we're just going to turn people's brains off.
I have stuff to say, but I don't want to say them. I hear you. I want to finish now. I only have really I've been Twitter warring for a little now, and people lacking oh, I'm not gonna say it. No. Okay. Yes. I hear you. I know
You're
what you
always
mean.
looking for drama.
Dude, I just started blocking everyone now. Like, everyone who's annoying me, I just block them.
Yeah, but you also do a lot of quote tweeting.
Yes, I do. It's fun. Is that bad? Is that like something? Because people get upset with me over that. Are you not allowed to do that? Why is the function there if you're not allowed to do that?
No, I there's nothing wrong with it. I'm saying when I say you look for drama and then you're like, oh, I just block people, it makes it sound like you're like avoiding the drama. And I'm saying like, well, you do a lot of quote tweeting. So like, obviously you're looking
and
for
that
it to an
attracts
extent.
drama?
Yeah, obviously,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we
if
look
I
at
just
drama
comment on somebody's thing, I'm just like engaging with them. But when I quote tweet it, I am saying, hey, all my followers, look at this. It was very different.
Oh, that's interesting. Huh.
I mean, you openly admitted on my stream that you brought the stealthing discourse back up a year later because you were trying to be hyperbolic and stir things up with Destiny. That was drama baiting, right?
Is that what I said? Sure.
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave now because I don't want to talk to you. So.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Well, at least she admitted to it that time. How you doing, Tom?
I'm great.
At least she admitted to it that time. Like, yeah, she does actually drama bait. She stirs drama, and she does so quite intentionally. She knows what she's doing.
There.
And she openly admitted to it on my stream. I've got a video up on my YouTube with her admitting to it. So it's funny that she says she tries to avoid drama. No, she's she's a pretty big drama baiter and shit stirrer. Unapologetically so.